Today, we are going to be talking about winning strategies for product launch marketing. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. And before we begin, we'd like to share with you two exciting announcements. One, our 5th annual women's event, Women in Medtech, will be next month with dates soon to come, followed up by our next in-person mixer, which will be exciting based off the great attendance and engagement we had at our last event. So before we begin, I'd like to also thank our sponsors for whom without their support, events like this could not happen. To kick us off the event, please welcome Lisa Thomas, our Marketing Chair of DeviceAlliance. Lisa?
Thank you, Scott, and welcome everybody. We're very excited to bring this event to you tonight. So, as the medical industry changes, medical companies are adjusting and transforming, and the changes we're seeing are forcing companies to think outside conventional industry boundaries. Medical device companies are developing progressive new strategies that engage customers through non-conventional channels. For this evening, we're going to hear from 3 marketing veterans who have been working with medical device companies and honing their craft for over 20 years. I'm going to pose a couple of questions that we discussed ahead of time. Given the current climate, we believe these will provide the best insight to winning strategies for medical device marketing. After our discussion, we'll open up the platform to your questions, and I'll speak a little bit to that in just a little bit. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our 3 panelists for the evening. Jen Christopher has over 20 years of experience in the healthcare sector. She's a partner at Bloom Creative, a creative agency focused exclusively on the medical device and healthcare sector. She is also founder of ZingLeap, a high-energy digital marketing group that helps brands through technical innovation and storytelling to deliver on client business objectives. Previously, Jen was the founder and creative director for JLoop and JLoop Health, a creative technology and development firm that specializes in creating memorable online experiences, primarily in the mobile space. Welcome, Jen. Next, we have Zachary Cavanaugh, who is a brand strategist and founder of State of Assembly, a visual and messaging brand agency. Over the last 5 years, he has specialized in B2B social media tactics for large companies like Microsoft and medical devices such as ClearFlow and BreathDirect. Thank you for being here, Zach. And finally, let me introduce Paul Williams, who's president and founder of MediaLine Communications, a strategic communications and public relations firm. With more than 25 years of experience, Paul has designed and implemented many successful global, national, and regional campaigns. These have included media placement and public education programs for the healthcare and medical device industries, among others. Paul's campaigns have reached millions worldwide and won multiple awards. Paul's clients have included Opus Medical, Alphatech Spine, Long Beach Memorial Medical Center, the State of California, the American Red Cross, and many others. Paul is also co-author of the New York Times bestselling book, Off Balance, with Olympic gold medalist Dominique Moceanu, which is currently being made into a series for FX. Welcome, Paul. So now for our first question, let me begin with Jen, and then we'll move through the panel. So Jen, when deciding on a marketing strategy that will work in the medical device industry, there are many factors to consider. As a marketing professional, can you share the must-dos and the don't-evers when it comes to creating a winning marketing strategy?
Great, Lisa, thank you. And I want to thank you first for the great introduction. And I'm excited to be presenting with, or discussing today with Zach and Paul. We've all worked together quite a bit and have a good shared energy. So we're excited to be here. Okay, so going through really a list of things that really in thinking it through of what is really important for your audience is develop your sales strategy first. It really is the first thing. It's easy to jump right into the marketing, but with a good solid sales strategy in place, your marketing team, whether it's external or internal, is really able to put together a good solid marketing strategy based on the sales strategy that you've put together. Another thing to really consider is that your marketing team and your sales team really need to play well together. And oftentimes, I think over the years, we've really seen sometimes a combination of sales and marketing, but something to really think about is to put two different hats on two different people or two different teams, and really, develop the synergy so that marketing is able to, learn from sales and hear what really resonates out in the field, and they're able to bring that back to the marketing team and, get their messages out there. Another thing that is also really good to determine up front is to clearly articulate or clearly spell out your target audience. There's so many different hats within the medical world when you're talking about the flow of the sales process within the hospitals. Oftentimes, there's a list, there's the respiratory therapist, there could be pulmonologists, there could be the champions that take it all the way through the process, all the way to the actual purchasers in the purchasing department. And it's important to outline all of those and take each of those target audiences into consideration before you spell out your marketing campaigns. And even more important is to think through what is their mindset, and maybe even take the time before you really start to work with your marketing team on what is their day like and where have they been. An example would be, we have a client that we've been working with that has created some ventilators. And, I think it's really important to take into consideration, the state of mind or where the respiratory therapists have been. They're overwhelmed, they're taxed. And as a new product on the market is, what can you alleviate for that particular target audience? That really, it's good to sort of think that through. Another big one is, and something to really work with your team on, is to, is be authentic, be you. All of you, I know, have great stories to tell. And there's a real authenticity in all of that, and the soul of a company that people want to hear. People connect with other people, and it's easy to think when it's a B2B company, especially in medical, that it's a business to business, but really at the end, it's people, and it's the hearts that you really touch through your product that makes a difference. And there are stories to be told. There's the moment that the idea was created. There's the moment that the people came together to come up with a new sort of breakthroughs in the actual device. And I think lastly, I would say, this is just something I think I've really learned just over the years, which is, when you're going through a strategic marketing process, there truly are three different timelines to think about. You've got the first, which is the agency perspective, which would like to, and it's very important to, is move through a very thorough, methodical process, going through research, going through strategy, the discovery, until we actually get to the idea creation and the creative. And that is one timeline. At the same time, we're also very aware that there's a pace of business, and there is regulatory, there are approvals, there's a financial side that needs to happen. And sometimes those two timelines have to happen together. And sometimes you deviate off course, but to not lose sight of the bigger, longer process. And the third timeline, I think that's also really important, and it's so apparent right now during, sort of ending some of this, the surge of COVID in the hospitals, is there's an environmental situation that's always going on. There are trends within the industry that make little adjustments to what the climate is and the way things are being perceived. And sort of going back to my ventilator example is, it wasn't too long ago that we were really talking to overwhelmed therapists within the environment, but things are starting to quiet down. And to really take a look at that, and maybe the message begins to shift or change, or there could be moments that you come up with a temporary message. So I think sort of keeping your eye on the pulse of those three things can sort of help, and then stay with your longer strategic, more long-term process as you go through the development. As far as don'ts, I guess the biggest ones I would say is, don't invest millions in a new product only to completely skip telling people about it at the end. So save budget, save time, save energy, and make sure that you're really able to get the word out at the end. And don't cheat the process at all in any of it. I would say, I guess in conclusion, is it is important to bring someone in from the outside. I think the reality is when you are developing your product and getting it out there, you are too close to your product to truly see the message and the rhythm. So what I think is great is to speak with your team, come up with what you think the mindset is, the stories. But as you begin to engage a marketing team or a marketing professional within your organization, is keeping a little bit of distance on the story so that the outside team is able to sort of see the rhythm and the patterns and the concise message that can eventually come out.
Thank you. No, that's very interesting. And just a quick follow-up to your point is with the pivoting now, are you seeing any trends right now from when you were working in COVID, when there were shutdowns and people were distancing versus now being opening up and things that you're just changing strategies slightly in that direction?
I mean, I think education is really important, and online educations, training your teams in sort of new ways, augmented reality, virtual reality, using tools and systems so they can get an experience of a hands-on product without the ability to actually sell in the hospitals. Is, we've been approached over and over. It's obviously a really, really big challenge. And some of that I think is here to stay. So it's so hard to completely skip the human touch or the human experience or the human explanation. And hopefully we will get to a spot where there will be a combination of that. But I think that's probably the biggest trend. And then I think, I know Zach is going to talk a lot more about this, but social media, I mean, all of that, I think that has changed. We're in front of our computers much more. And there's a lot to learn on social media about your target audience. And people have spent a bit of time on social media in the last period.
Absolutely. And so that is a good opportunity to move to Zach. And Zach, you do have expertise in social media. And I think maybe as medical device companies don't necessarily think about social media as a platform that is something that's valuable in this space. So, with that, take it away. And please feel free to comment on anything that Jen has said in her opening.
For sure. Thank you, DeviceAlliance, for having me. And this is a great panel. Social media, I think you probably figured it out really quickly during quarantine that salespeople couldn't make their way into hospitals. And you probably had to figure out very quickly that there had to be a different way to get in touch with people. And social media, almost on, I guess, like March 15th, it just felt like I got a million calls from people worried and businesses worried about what they were going to do now. How are they going to sell their product? How are they going to get it out there? And I saw lots of social media posts go out, and I saw people trying to reach out and try to figure it out. Device companies try to figure it out, what was working and what was not working. And I think the lesson here, and this is the do right here, is to realize that your company, your organization, your device is not the hero. It's the people who use that device as the hero. And sometimes we get that mixed up because when we make something, we get so into it. Just like Jen said, you do need a separation. You need someone else to look at this from a different point of view. It's the only thing that you look at all day. So I would like you to imagine that you are the sword maker and the hero is the person who uses your sword to slay the dragon. And when they come back home and everybody gives them cheers and says, congratulations, you did a great job, you have to go and have a beer with your friends in that pub and just not be the hero. And that's great because other heroes know that you're the weapon that they used. So other heroes then start to see that you are the ones, you made a device that is saving people's lives. And then through instead of it being the big flag and I'm the hero, you are actually creating something which is even greater. So the way that we did this, I have a client that right during quarantine, they really wanted to get social media going. So of course, they, as many of you might have done, said, okay, I'm going to start making some posts that say my features and my benefits of this product. Because these people I'm selling it to, they're smart. If I told them the feature, if I told them the benefit, they wouldn't understand. They'd get it, and they would just purchase it. Not like that. It takes a lot more effort to do that. The features, and one way to think about it, in 1900s, features were very important when you were selling a brand or selling a product. If you were selling an airplane, you would say it flies, that's the feature. And in the 1920s, things moved to benefits. You'd say, what is the benefit of an airplane? It gets you from here to there quicker. In the 1950s, it was more of an experience. You either rode an airplane because of luxury. Then in the 2000s, things started to change into more of identity. Meaning, so for instance, if you were flying on Virgin Airlines, you'd be like, oh, very nice. And if you were flying on Delta, you'd be like, oh. And if you were flying on Spirit, you go, oh, no. Because those are the types of things that actually make people change their minds. It's just a gut feeling. Because any product that you have is only good for so long, someone is going to eventually take it over. You have big businesses. I watched this with Microsoft. Microsoft went to Slack and they said, can we purchase Slack? And they said, no, you can't. And they just made it, just built their own thing. And that's called Microsoft Teams. That's going to eventually happen to all businesses. Eventually you will lose a patent or you will lose that IP of some sort, and someone will figure it out and they'll make a better one. And then what you are eventually relying on is the brand. So what you want to do is celebrate the people as a brand, to celebrate those heroes. So for instance, going back to that client, what we did is instead of posting things about features and benefits, what we did is we actually found cardiac surgeons, because this client had made a catheter, found cardiac surgeons. And then when a cardiac surgeon would actually post something that said like, I just did this amazing surgery, we would repost it. And then we would say, that is an amazing surgery. Great job. Thank you for sharing that. And what we found is that people over a long period of time started coming to the website. Social posts went up, social engagement went up slightly. Didn't really matter, because what we wanted them to do was purchase. We didn't really want likes or shares, and anything in that nature. What we wanted was people to make a purchase. We wanted them to move to the website. And what we saw was that more people started going to the post that we had said thank you, and then moving on to the website. And then we also saw that more searches on Google was happening, because then they recognized that this business was then celebrating them and making them look good. So there's something to be said about doing making friends and influencing people, about talking about that other person and telling them how great they are and being interested in what they're doing. That's the big deal. Be interested in what they have, celebrate them, let them be their hero, and you give them that grand weapon. And as part of that, don't confuse yourself with B2C. On social media, B2C social media is just about getting you to think about something, because B2C most of the time is just about the idea that at any one moment they could purchase something. B2B doesn't work that way. It usually takes 3 months, 6 months, a year to get a purchase through, all the way through. So if you keep posting the same thing about your product over and over, you're going to you're just going to irritate them, and they're going to get fatigued and they're going to leave. That's another good reason why you celebrate them. So with B2B, you are essentially giving them reasons to come back and to celebrate others. So don't make it all about yourself. Make it about them. Make it about who they are and what they do, and how your device or weapon, if you will help them. And I think that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. And just as kind of a follow-up, with social media, one of the things that has to happen is keeping the content fresh. So how do you keep in that regard, featuring your customer and making them the hero? How do you keep the content fresh?
Yeah, so that's fairly easy. You probably already know who your customer is. You probably know what job they have. So you go and find them on a social media. You go through their feed. You look at something that they did and you repost it and you say, that's a great job. Thank you for sharing. And that's all you need to do. But do make sure that on your Twitter handle, on your Twitter page or your LinkedIn page, that page, if you're doing that, that page has to be an advertisement. So it has to be as good as any ad that you put out there. It has to have a reason for buying, the features and benefits, because you're getting them with that gut feeling first off, because you're saying, that's great. They like me, I like them. But then once they get to that page, then they realize that your product has benefits and features that could help them. So it's pretty easy just to find those people are. You already know who they are. And that's what Jen was talking about, getting sales and then social media together. That's what we're working with our client. So for instance, our sales team gives us a list of people that they're going after, or a list of their people that whatever hospital that they're interested in. We take that list of people, find them on social media, and then start looking to see how we can interact with them and then move that sales process along, because then they have the impression and they know the product when they didn't know it before.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move to the PR side of the business now with Paul, and very different perspective with earned media and all the things that you're doing. Can you share a little bit about how you go about doing your business and the must-dos and the don't-evers?
Absolutely. And thanks, Lisa and Scott and all the good people at the DeviceAlliance for inviting me to participate in this fantastic panel. And like Jen and Zach said, I've worked with both of them before and they're terrific. So it's really an honor to share the virtual stage with them. They're terrific. They know of what they speak. So like Lisa said, I'm going to talk a little bit about PR, which is a different perspective. You know, we work very closely in concert with the creative team, the social media team, the advertising, but it is different and we have to approach it differently. So when it comes to must-dos and kind of piggybacking on what Jen had said with her first must-do, planning ahead is essential. You know, with PR, we create a narrative, we tell a story, and it's very important that all the chapters in that book are laid out before the book is published. You know, you need to really figure out what those value propositions are for the device that you're going to be launching or the campaign that you're going to be conducting. And you need to map out how you're going to tell that story to the various different audiences. So part of that is determining who exactly your primary target audiences are. And on the PR side, what's most important about those audiences is where they get their information. Because unlike with advertising and even to a certain extent social media, with PR, you don't have the luxury of boasting as much. You know, you're trying to capture a third-party endorsement, so you have to provide information from in a way that sounds like the news. So where do the target audiences get their information? You know, if you're a medical device company, you're marketing to select different customer bases. So specialists, referring doctors, investors, maybe distributors, the patients and patient advocacy communities, they all get their information from different places. So for example, if you're in the diabetes space and you're developing a device that helps patients who have diabetes, they've got a very proactive patient advocacy community in the diabetes space. There's chat boards, there's resource stations essentially online that people go to get their information. So it's no longer just traditional let's put a press release out over the wire for PR, and if we're lucky, get in a trade. You need to have a whole catalog, a whole laundry list of all those targets that you need to hit. And press releases are still very important. To me, it's the tip of the iceberg. It's where you get to sort of launch your story, but you also need to find ways to plant those seeds, get those third-party endorsements rolling in a lot of different places. And as part of that narrative as well is the other big must do is to establish your company as an expert in the space, in the field that you're a part of. So if you are a diabetes or a cardiovascular or a sports medicine company, part of those press releases that you put out, too many companies make them, I'm jumping ahead to don't evers, but a lot of companies make the mistake of just talking about the product and what it does. That's important, of course, but setting up as part of your narrative the need is essentially important as part of your PR strategy. You need to be able to, that's the first chapter of the story, is getting the buy-in, not just from the clinical community, but from the general public and investors. Knowing that there's a need for that product that you're about to introduce is a hugely important part of everything we do. And I know that's true for what Jen and Zach do as well. But in PR, you can't really have an effective PR campaign without establishing that need and then answering, so you're sort of saying, what's the problem? And then the solution. And the solution is the launch of the product. So then you just need to find ways to announce your new device multiple times. You can't, like Zach said about social media, you don't want to keep saying the same thing over and over again. But you need to find ways to remind people that this new device is here. When we put out press releases or announcements to the media, there are a few different ways you can do that. Obviously, the launch is the big one, but there are other things you can do. The FDA approval, the CE mark establishment, expansion of the sales team internally, benchmark results for maybe a number of sales that have been achieved or number of patients treated, clinical data that's been announced or presentation at a essential trade show, awards won, training programs launched, emerging applications or indications for the device that are different than the initial indications and applications. Those are all later chapters of the story so that you have different excuses to continue shouting from the rooftops about the device. So those are all must-dos. As far as don't evers, one obvious one, although I've seen it happen, announcing information to the press prematurely is a big don't ever. Putting out a press release before, saying maybe your company makes the mistake of having a little bit of initial data from a study that's being done, and then you make the mistake of putting a press release out about the study before this actual study has been published or is completed. That's a big mistake in the medical device world on the PR side, because you're really chipping away at your credibility as an organization. And with that media, when you announce something prematurely, you're also sort of blowing the opportunity for that big splash. That when you want to make your first impression is very important, and you don't want that first impression to be a little piece of the message because you're not really ready with the whole message yet. Another don't ever is making your press releases and PR materials sound too much like infomercials. With your creative team, they can do a great job getting the sales pitch out in the form of a creative advertisement. But in PR, you really can't do that. You shouldn't. Some companies do. They try to put press releases out that read like commercials for their products. And with press releases, it's always a numbers game. You're putting press releases out to all the media that you're trying to achieve placements with, and they judge your press releases on face value. They're harried, they're busy people too, and they want to, when they have 40 different press releases to look at, they want to plagiarize at will the ones that are written in a journalistic sense that really sound like news that they can then take and reproduce. And that's what we really want when we put a press release out, is for the publications that we want to just take it as is and not have to change too much of it. If your press release reads like a commercial, no trade publication is going to publish that as it is, so they may not want to take the time to rewrite it. So your pickup ends up being a lot less. Another don't ever is trashing the competition. In the medical device space, it's really not Coke versus Pepsi, right? It's a totally different world. We're working with doctors and clinicians as our customers, as our clients' customers, who use a lot of the competition's products, and they might be very loyal and very proprietary about them. So we don't want to offend or upset or look bad or ham-fisted in the eyes of those potential customers. I always work with my, almost all of my customers have disdain for some of their competition, but I work very closely with them when we put our press releases together. There are a lot of clever ways that you can establish yourself as the best or the first or the only one that does X, Y, or Z without insulting the competition for not doing X, Y, or Z. The message will be carried forward and you can still come across as a classy organization. So trashing the competition is another no-no. And the last one I'll share is putting kitchen sink content out. A lot of times companies will be excited about 5 or 6 little bits of news, and there's nothing wrong with that. Use it in social media or take 1 or 2 of the big ones and make a nice press release, but don't put everything that's going on into one press release. It makes it really hard for editors and reporters to use. And I see that especially during COVID days where there wasn't as much big news going on for a lot of companies. They tried to cobble together excuses for putting their brands out. While that's a good idea on the surface, yes, to put news out about yourself and keep your brand relevant during a time of challenge, you should work closely with your PR people to come up with meaningful messages that are still true to your original narrative, not just the HR person just got a new suit kind of stuff is not breaking news.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. And just as a follow-up, how important is it, you mentioned putting the press releases out on the wire. How important is it to establish relationships with the press, or is it just really about getting the press release out on the wire?
It's relationships are still key. Even though the world has changed and, we have relationships with people we've never actually met in person these days, thanks to, the way we communicate electronically, and certainly after COVID, even more so. But relationships with the media and your PR representatives are essential. I mean, I personally keep very close relationships with editors and reporters from every kind of, even when I'm not working with a client in a certain space, I keep those relationships fresh because I know ultimately I'll be back in that cardio space again, or, kidney disease again, even if I'm not doing it right now. And so I've really got to keep those relationships fresh because when that happens, and if you do continue to provide them quality content, they'll come to you. That's the other thing. Like I said earlier, a medical device company that's doing a good job with its PR wants to be seen as an expert. So it's really important that the reporters in that space come to them. So if they want to know, what's innovative, what's going on, what's new in the world of sports medicine, hopefully they'll come to that orthopedic company in Orange County that's doing something unique in sports medicine because they've sent them quality content in the past. They've been cooperative. They've answered questions in a timely fashion, and they've been good communicators with them. It's super important. And, yes, do both. Continue to put press releases out over the wire. It's an essential part of what we all do when we promote companies, but couple that with relationships, because even the wire, the practice of putting information out over the wire is enhanced and improved when you have good relationships. Because when the people who scan that ticker of the wire see information coming across from companies they've worked with in the past, they say, oh, good, a story from XYZ company. They're more likely to pluck that story and use it in their trade.
Yeah, great point. Thank you so much. All right. So our second question, we're going to move to looking at an agency and hiring an agency. So I'm going to pose this to Zach first. When a medical device company is looking to hire a marketing agency for their business, what should they look for, and what should they ask a potential agency? And is this different depending upon the size or the stage of the company?
Yeah, let's see. I didn't know I was going to go first, but yeah, I'll jump this one. So most of the time I would say that when you're, I would say that especially sometimes you how do I put this? As far as it goes for a social media, I can answer that pretty quickly, is that you don't want to find someone who's doing social media based upon the idea of just taking your content and then repurposing it over and over, because after a period of time, it gets, like I said, it gets a little low. So you need to find someone who is a little bit more creative in ways that they can find different avenues of trying to get more people to your website. And if they talk about this has 10,000 likes and this has 50,000 shares, that's not always that great. If you ever heard of the phrase Schadenfreude, Schadenfreude is like when you laugh at someone because something bad happened to them, and that is great for likes and it's great for shares. You can get many, and if we want to take you and you videotape you and you drop your device and it breaks into 1,000 pieces, that's Schadenfreude, and that will get you lots of likes. The wrong people. So that's what you need to pay attention to, not necessarily the end result on the platform itself, but how many people are coming to the website based upon what kind of campaigns that they are running. So I think that's, I would just look through their portfolio and you can really easily see if they only show you things that are just about the device or just about getting likes, then it's probably not a great fit. Try to find someone a little bit more creative.
Okay, perfect. And does it matter the size of the stage of the company for the agency that they would look for?
Oh yeah, sorry. Certainly. Bigger agencies, if you spend more money, you'll get a better product for the most part. That's just the way that kind of works when it comes to agencies. If you're going with a smaller agency, it will only get you so far because they only have so much bandwidth to take care of you. And smaller agencies will end up getting lots of different clients and not giving you all the love that you want. So if something that a client actually taught me is that yes, I could go about doing little things for a lot of different people, or what would get me out of bed is someone who pays me a good amount of money and then I will just move everything away from them just for them. So maybe in the beginning, you do it for yourself a little bit and see what works. And then check the bandwidth, every year and see if that social media team and that marketing team or that agency is growing with you. And because at some point it's not going to fit. So I would just check it every year.
Okay, perfect. I think I'm going to go to Paul second this time. Paul, when it comes to hiring a PR agency or communications, what are some of the questions that a company should ask? And again, does it matter depending upon the stage, the type of company and the type of things that they should look for within an agency?
Sure. I'll start with the second question first. As far as the size of the medical device company, the healthcare company that's looking to hire that agency, when it comes to PR, at least my philosophy is size doesn't matter in this case, because you could have a Medtronic company that's a global player, or a Johnson & Johnson type company, or you could have a small startup company. I think they both deserve and require the same amount of attention from their PR plan. And in the smallest, newest company in the world should behave like Johnson & Johnson in terms of they've got something special that they believe in too, and it should share just as many column inches in the trade publications as the big guns have. So to the first question, so when that medical device company, regardless of size, goes to interview or look for a PR company, I think one of the first and most important questions they should ask is, who's going to be handling my account? Because if you go to a really large, gigantic agency, While there are some benefits to that, the chances of you getting someone who's very experienced and who has who will focus on your company, unless you are Johnson & Johnson, is very slim. You don't want to end up with an intern. You want to end up with someone who, so that's what I like about the boutique PR firms. You end up getting to work with someone who's been around for a long time and understands the space really well and can integrate with the client closely. Also, look for a firm that has experience in healthcare and medical device specifically. I say that because you'll go to some firms that are great and are creative and have some clever ideas for PR, but they may not be well versed in the unique language, the trades, the regulatory processes that are essential for the PR firm to understand. If you could take that learning curve out of the way when you establish a new relationship with a PR firm, you're several steps ahead of the game. So that's another question to ask is, show me what you've done, or tell us, have you worked with companies like ours? And have you been active in that space? Also, journalism chops, they teach PR in school today, which is great. But I'm finding, to my dismay, with a lot of junior PR execs that are coming through, they're talented in some of the aspects of PR. But to me, always, and I was trained, I'm a little biased, I suppose, because I was trained as a journalist, but I like press releases to be written, like I said before, that can be just lifted and plagiarized by the editors that you're sending them to. So if you're working with a PR firm, that you can get great creative language from your creative agency, but from your PR firm, you need journalistic language. You need language that will be easily placeable and achieving those third-party endorsements with the media that you're trying so hard to win and to get in front of your audience with. And lastly, important, and Zach touched on this a little too, is willingness to collaborate. If you're hiring a PR firm, are they going to be able to, because some PR firms are very proprietary. They don't want, they poo-poo getting in the sandbox with the creative agency or the social media team. The best PR people, in my experience, and I like to think of myself as one of them, enjoy the process of collaborating with a good, smart social media person like Zach, or a creative agency like Bloom. It's so important to be able to sit together, because that way, that all-important element of narrative becomes really fine-tuned. The creative agency is no doubt doing some market research and putting together very important messaging. The social media team is doing things with language that involve keywords and other things that can also cross over into the press releases and the articles that we place on the PR side. So if you ask a potential PR person or PR firm if they collaborate well with your ad, your creative team or your social media, and they don't, I would run, because it's really important to get collaborators working together.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And speaking of collaborators, let's move last but certainly not least to Jen. And both from a creative standpoint and also branding agency, what advice would you give to somebody looking for a potential agency? And does that differ depending upon the size or stage of the company?
Well, first of all, I'd say it absolutely differs between the size of the agency. And I think there's a lot of different aspects to think about. I think number one is there's quite a few different roles in even the small agency setting. So you'd have a project manager, a strategist, a creative, and technology. And right there, you have very different brains and ways of thinking. And the beauty of an agency or a group that works together is there's a real good yin and yang with all of those types. So you have a project manager thinking time, target, budget. You've got a creative who's sitting on top of the strategy that is created. And that is their sole purpose, is to stay on target with the strategy. The creative works off of that and can create ideas on top of the strategy. And then the technology brings it all to life. And those are key elements. Now you can get those in a very small team. It's also possible to get what sometimes we say is like a garage designer, and that would be probably a sort of a one-man band or somebody that can come and work for you. And you know, they're few and far between, but sometimes if you're budget conscious and you're early on in the startup stage, that can be an option for you. The challenge there then, though, is the strategy and the sort of the project management lives inside of one brain. And oftentimes it's not seen in briefs and creatives. And when you are going to collaborate with PR and the social team and pieces like that, there's not really documents to go off of. And if you lose that person, you really lose sort of the guts of it all. So you kind of got to match the budget. So obviously, depending on where you are. And then find the team that works for you. You've got the small agency, you have the large agency, and obviously the large agency has really great ideas and things that they can pull off a shelf, but it's also for a pretty penny. You'll work with specialized agencies. You could work with overseas, which can be definitely a benefit as far as price is concerned, but a challenge when you actually need something that's going to be on target within a certain amount of time. And I've sort of worked in all of those different sort of areas, but I think that's the sort of one of the pieces to try to think about. If it were me, I think the first thing I would do is take a look at your team and think about who's going to be the single point of contact for marketing. Do you have a CMO? Do you have a marketing manager? Or is it a marketing director? And in that case of that person or team or expertise within who you have, what are the talents? And do they fall within the project management or creative or technology? And then I'd go and I'd interview different agencies and ask what their team is made of. And just like Paul said, collaboration is key. If they're willing to work with you and your internal team, then they're collaborators. You know, maybe you have somebody that can actually develop a website, but they're not a creative, and you can sort of partner in that way and work together. And then you start really building something that uses efficiencies and really leverages everybody within the team. And then just like Paul said, again, the collaboration is just so important with other team members and things like that. And I guess lastly, as in this, Zach would say, Paul would say, it's really important to find a team that listens and really listens to your challenges and what your product has to offer, and listens to the target audience and takes all of that in to start to really develop a real good strategy. I think often, agencies, as they move into the medium-sized agencies, there's a little bit more of a product that's created that you may get somebody else's solution applied to your particular device. And especially when you have something unique and interesting and it fits in a certain area, you may not realize that right away. But if it were me, I really would evaluate, what is that dialogue like? Are they selling me something? Are they selling their features and benefits? Or are they really listening to what makes you unique and special and in your environment and about your product?
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you all for your perspective. Very interesting. We are now going to move into the Q&A section of the event. And so for that, you all have a reaction button on the bottom of your screen. And so we're going to let you ask your own question for those who are here this evening. So if you just want to raise your hand, if everybody can try that and just raise their hand so we know that it works. And then we can, here, let me see. Yeah. Okay. Anybody here, just do or a thumbs up, that will work also. And so we're going to open it up to questions. Any questions from the group? I do not see any. So I'm going to ask a question to the panel. If you could share, because you all have had so many interesting years of experience, either your funniest story, your funniest experience, or your favorite experience, or something that you would like to share when you look back on your career and you just go, oh, wow, that was just such an interesting, funny Maybe maybe it was a success, maybe it was a fail, what have you. Just one of your funniest stories that you'd like to share. And then anybody jump in that would like to.
Well, I've got one, and it kind of goes back to being there as a collaborator with the media. When you're in PR, it's really important that you support the media that you're with. And I did a story once, actually had CNN come in to film a procedure, a medical procedure in an operating room where one of my clients' product was in use. And the guy who came in, the cameraman from CNN who was capturing the footage, the reporter came first, interviewed the surgeon and left, and that was fine. The cameraman was asked to capture some footage of the procedure, and the procedure was a elaborate, shall we say, intense and somewhat grisly procedure that you wouldn't be able to really show on television anyway. But this cameraman was telling me these stories about how he had, before he was on the health detail, he had been covering war, and he'd been, all around the world, and he'd seen really a lot of horrific things, and he was tough as nails. And because I had warned him, I said, this is a pretty intense procedure. If you're going to be filming this, if you're squeamish at all, he said, squeamish? I've been in Afghanistan. I've filmed, I've been all over the world. Well, sure enough, I was standing behind this guy as he was filming, and he actually fainted during the procedure. He fell backwards, and I was able to help break his fall and actually save his camera from breaking. And he still sends me basically love letters every now and then for saving his camera. But yeah, so being there with the media and being a partner, an active partner, is key. But I always think back to that in terms of humorous stories. And what we do in the medical world is sometimes more significant than anything else, I think.
Absolutely. Very, very much so. All right.
Paul, this is not necessarily funny, but I was thinking about what Paul was talking about with the articles and the PR articles. Doing social media, oftentimes what I end up doing is taking an article and scanning it and trying to find something that I could make a post for. And if an article, if a press release is just too much about salesy stuff, and I ignore it, and I don't push it forward. And that's a good lesson into why you do want to make those PR those press releases. You need to make sure that they have good quality content, because you just scan it, and this is really easy. This is something that if you ever want to make a social post, it's really easy to scan an article. At the top and at the bottom is usually where they put the most important information. So you can either take the top part and then rewrite it, and then make it and say, and then just give the headline away, like they just did this with this brand new thing, and then you post it. And that makes you look, this is especially important for CEOs or C-level people, C-level folks who want to be thought of as a thought leader. So you can take all these great articles and you can put your own spin on it by taking that last paragraph or that top paragraph and then sending it out, and you look like you're just a brilliant person because you just read this amazing article and you're up on all the knowledge that's happening in that industry.
That's great.
Hey, Lisa, I have a question.
Yeah.
And I promise here to lower my hand here so you don't have this big yellow hand coming up here. So last week, when we were attending LSI with a multitude of startup medical device companies, in my sales experience, traditional marketing in medtech has been, when you go to the hospital, do you have the clinical papers to back it up, to basically influence the surgeon, to then tell the payers to make the decisions and all that, and then paper materials in which you would take to trade shows. And that was kind of traditionally the way. What I've seen over the past year and a half, as we all have, is this consumerization or social media aspect to it, where they're really kind of hitting the heart a little bit more than the clinical aspect of it, right? You can see a Medtronic, a J&J, where they're showing a grandparent playing with their grandchild, and that seems to be these key drivers. And so my question for the panel is, with respect to the comments, Jen, you spoke a lot about that strategy. But then also, I forget earlier, I heard a little bit of the strategy about you have to be an expert in the field and demonstrate this. You know, with so many different ways to go about it in your small company, you might not have the money to prove your expertise or to do these grand scale programs, but there's a little bit of a guerrilla marketing aspect to it, how you can implement that through social media. So I'm curious, what would be your best advice for these fledgling startups to kind of get some good momentum to take their clinical effectiveness and make a good campaign strategy around that? I'll kick it off to Jen first. How's that?
Yeah, and you know, this seems like a really great question to answer for Zach. Really on the social media side, there's some amazing things you can do. And it's something I didn't hit on, but I think it is wise at the very beginning just to start thinking about who's going to champion your product and your KOLs and start to develop those relationships. And you can do that really through social media as early as possible to start to help drive the message.
Yeah.
Zach, do you want to take?
Yeah, I think that the two, it is solely, it's social media. It's supposed to be social. It's supposed to be you interacting with someone else on a human level, and you figuring out what that is. So for instance, when you talked about, Scott, campaigns that hit at the heart, those campaigns, like, again, if you have a product and you're selling your product and you're only talking about your product, do you imagine that for instance, one doctor is seeing that thing over and over and over again, as well as everybody else on this meeting, as well as everybody else in that industry? All those doctors are just getting the same thing, just buy our product, buy our product, buy our product. And it becomes a little too heavy. And so if you reach out and try to connect to them on a human level, that's why that works. Then you're much more apt to get them to connect and then to look at your stuff with their mind and their heart open, instead of it just being buy. And there are great ways to do that. You just connect on LinkedIn. You connect on you connect on these. You guys figure out you both went to Michigan, and then you make that connection that way. So yeah, I think that there's a lot more that you can do on campaigns, and then even personally on your teams. Small teams can make personal connections with all these people without having to be physically in front of them. They can do it via social.
One of the things that I advised a lot of my clients to do during the pandemic, and actually something I did before, was whenever we start a PR campaign, is to create a speakers bureau. This kind of goes to Scott's question about, well, what if you're a smaller company, you still want to somehow cut through the weeds a little bit and stand out when there's all these big players and maybe in your space. If you create this speakers bureau, meaning, so you've got your CEO, you've got maybe some of the sciencey guys, you've got some KOLs, some champions for your products. Maybe maybe you're treating some area of medicine that has a strong patient advocacy group, and you can partner with them and share some of that love with them. It's amazing. You can engender an incredible amount of loyalty among the clinical community as well as the patient advocacy community if you partner with them. If you come with them and say, I've been invited to, or I'm putting a press release out about National Torn Rotator Cuff Day or something like that. Well, let's talk about torn rotator cuffs together. Get a couple of KOLs who really know their stuff in sports medicine. Get maybe some sports trainers, or maybe a former athlete who had a torn rotator cuff. Different interesting people who, they're not going to shout from the rooftop about your product specifically, but you get your brand out there. You're attached to these interesting people, and you're part of that dialogue that you might not otherwise been a part of, because you're not J&J, you're not the biggest one in the space, but you're coming up with creative ideas, and you're putting out press releases, you're doing social media like Zach was describing that touches the heart, or you're doing ad campaigns, like Bloom would do, that really establish some visuals that will resonate with people, and putting language out there that's collaborative and and touches the thoughts and minds. So you can be thought leaders in the space, even if your company is just a startup.
And one little, I promise I won't take too much time here. One follow-up question. Paul, you mentioned patient advocacy groups. I'm curious, based on all three of your experiences, we're heading toward a trend of patients someday being able to own their own healthcare data. Are the three of you seeing trends out there where medical device companies are more or less having you go for not necessarily the end purchaser, but the end patient as a first level strategy to have them drive the market? I'm sure you've all heard this scenario. Someone goes to a doctor, I saw on WebMD, and everyone's like, well, they're making those suggestions, but someday they may go to the hospital and say, I'd like an Edwards transcatheter heart valve. Are you seeing that strategy being played into the work that you're currently doing with clients, and how does that impact your thoughts on where we're going forward with marketing?
Yeah, I mean, many years ago, I started my firm back in '96, and I think one of my first big medical device companies back in '97, '98 was Interpor Cross, which was a Irvine-based medical device company. It was a spine company. They don't exist anymore. They were bought out by Biomet, but Interpor Cross. And I worked closely with them to do exactly what Scott's asking about. We came up with the idea to, even though they always historically marketed themselves directly to orthopedic surgeons and spine specialists, they decided, let's get those patients knocking on their doctor's doors saying, hey, doc, why don't you tell me about this? They had this product called Autologous growth factors. It was simple and easy to understand. It was about taking your blood out, putting it in a machine, putting it back at the site of an injury to sort of trick the body and stimulate growth and stimulate healing at a certain part of a damaged bone. And we decided, we're still marketing to those doctors. Yes, that was just something we did, but we did a whole campaign that was patient advocacy driven. And it was very successful. We found a couple of athletes, going back to sports medicine again, but there was actually, fortunately, it kind of fell in our lap, but there was a Denver Bronco player who had this done. So we were able to tell that story in the Denver market, and then it caught fire. We did ABC affiliates in different markets all around the country where we had different doctors championing the concept. After a few of the doctors saw it, they wanted to do it, and patients really genuinely did start asking, how can I stimulate this? Can I get my ankle to heal faster if I have this done? Because they saw it on the evening news, not because they read about it in, a clinical journal.
Yeah, that's why wouldn't you? The democratization of all this information, why wouldn't you go and talk to the people who are ultimately going to be using that product, whether that's inside their body or not. It's worked well for pharma, and it's worked well for children's toys. It's something you need to just go right to the person who is going to use it and speak to them on their level. And I think it's a great exercise to ultimately get the pain points and leverage those people, because they're going to push it and their families are going to push it more than I think a doctor would. I think really, ultimately, their family wants to see that person being taken care of. And that's where you want to get to that point.
That's right. And to add to what Scott was asking too about the trends currently. So at the time, that I worked on that project back in the late 90s, it was an anomaly. It was very unusual for a medical device company to do that. But now, especially during COVID, I'm finding, as Zach's describing, why wouldn't you? And more companies are seeing that. And I think, good creative agencies and PR firms and social media teams are helping sort of shine the light on the path for them that way. I think it's definitely a trend that we're going to see more and more of. Almost all my clients do it, even the ones who never had done it historically.
Yeah, and if you don't know how, an agency knows how to do it. You may not have that understanding of how do you figure out how I'm going to get that the person who has the person who's getting that product. I don't know how we're going to change that and put that in. Agencies can figure that out. You give that to them and then let them do that job. And you can go ahead and continue on and focus on making the business stronger.
And I think at the end of the day, the physician wants to help the patient. So if you're able to get directly to the patient and understand their mindset, we have a testing product for autoimmune, for lupus and Crohn's, and the whole diagnostic period is really long. It's lots of frustration, and there's lots of groups and places that those groups live online. And so yes, you can speak directly to them. And then it's also lots of social listening and finding what happens in those conversations so that you can even weave those back. Those doctors or physicians are pretty in tune with these sort of long-term patients that they've been working to diagnose. Or in the, we also have a breast cancer sort of detection where they're able to see clear margins, and some of those products too, even though it's during a surgery, it's when the patient's under, they want to know that they're not going to have a second surgery. So they will begin to request, or they're pretty educated patients these days and really knowledgeable. And especially in conjunction with nurse navigators at hospitals, they're their own advocates. So yeah, there's a lot of heart in all of that.
Well,
Sorry about that. Didn't realize it was still muted. We've got one more question from Jeremy. It's how early do you recommend engaging with a marketing or PR firm for a startup? And Jen, let's start with you.
I would start conversations pretty early. You may or may not engage them quite yet, but I think it's worth the hunt and start the conversations. We have had a product that we had discussions with for a very long time that was working to get their emergency use approvals. And I think we weren't necessarily engaged, but we were sort of in partnership and on their team, and understanding of the process and able to sort of see the trends. So if an agency is willing to do that and go with you a little bit on that journey until you're really ready and have a budget ready and are ready to, like I said earlier, have a sales process in place and a sales strategy and some of those things, I would say the earlier the better. Not all agencies are willing to do that, but I would go for early. I personally, as a strategist and a marketing strategist, I like to really understand it at its core and be a part of the team.
I would second that. I agree with Jen very strongly on that. I think that even when the budget isn't there, as I said earlier, narrative on the PR side is really important. So, I mean, I really like to at least meet with companies who aren't ready yet, just to help them establish that narrative so that when they are ready a little bit further down the road, that there's no surprises, because it can be panic stations if they haven't prepared in advance. If they suddenly say, oh man, we need to do a marketing and a PR campaign right now, and and they're starting, it can be frustrating for them. It can be a lot stronger if they've taken the time early on to meet with an agency and sit down and if, like Jen says, if the agency is willing early on to sit down with them and sort of hash out, what is that narrative going to be, and then look at prospective timelines, because we all know that, FDA approvals don't always come when they're supposed to come, and things aren't always ready, and regulatory approvals don't always happen as fast as you'd like, or sometimes they surprise you and are faster. So mapping everything out and knowing, okay, when this happens, we want to be, 60 days out from our press announcement, that kind of stuff, then they'll know, and they've already had those discussions about what the value proposition of their brand is and what's unique and special about their product and who they're trying to reach and why. So yeah, early is you can't be too early, in my opinion, for those conversations.
I've seen businesses not engage with agencies and figure that they would be able to figure it out really early, and I find out that they did need to do that work and then had to stop everything, and then they engaged with agencies, got everybody on the same part, and then found out that they had to go 2 steps back and then go forward again. And that really hurts, especially when you're trying to hit a moment, because campaigns do much better when things are trending and they hit a moment. If they hit the right moment and you're ready to go, that's when it just goes and it lights. And if you miss that because you didn't, even just talking to someone, and again, you just get on social media, have a question, say, it's like that whole interview thing where you're like, hey, can I take an hour of your time and ask you a few questions? That's the way you do it. You don't have to necessarily pay for them. Maybe you just pay for lunch. You can pay for my lunch. That's fine. I'm okay with that. And I love to talk about what I do. So that's the type of thing that you could do really early without getting the whole agency behind you.
That's great. Great perspective. Thank you all. I love the panel. It's a great perspective from everybody. We are going to move now to breakout sessions.